and I'm an artist blacksmith in a little town called Cargill, and that's in Ontario, Canada. I've been doing this for a little over 30 years, and I mostly work on smaller pieces with a few larger outdoor sculptures thrown in. It's been a long journey for me, and lots of interesting details I've done through the years. Many options and techniques and things I've learned. Early on, always as a child, I worked with my hands. I liked making things, crafts and that. I had very few tools at home. Things like I'd be using a screwdriver as a chisel and a great big drill to drill holes in things, and simple saws, mostly woodworking. And it was a natural expression to work with my hands in all kinds of things. And I was going to University of Waterloo, for geological engineering. And I stopped in a blacksmith shop in a little town outside of Waterloo, and I found that I was just entranced. He was working away, he was moving the metal hot, hammering, and just as I was leaving the blacksmith shop, I saw that he offered courses. Well, the courses, I took the first one and the second one and all he had, and I ended up working for him while I was going to university. So he was my part-time job through university, paying my student bills. And I learned a lot from him. It was in the Forge and Anvil shop and run by Dean Peisner. A very good base to come to this. When I finished university, my blacksmithing had been converted to a small hobby business, and it was helping to pay bills. And then as a geological engineer at that time, early 90s, there was nothing available for me. So consequently, my hobby business became a full-time business. And here I am, 30-odd years later, still doing it. So as I tell my students, no path is straight. We often take curves and changes throughout our careers. A number of the tools of the blacksmith. I use traditional techniques. Some of my tools are quite modern. I use a modern anvil. I use arc welding. I use grinding and drilling, all of these things that require electricity of sorts. My fundamental tools are the forge and anvil, and then my air hammer. And an air hammer is a large mechanical device that allows much heavier work on the bars. I'm not a large person, so I need to have mechanical advantage for some of the sculpture works I do and the long, heavy drawouts, things like that. I'm fortunate enough that I build my own air hammers, so I can tweak and adjust them and change the design as I see fit. It's an essential tool for me, literally my right hand in the shop. The anvil's pretty straightforward. It's a large block of steel, and what you would typically think of as an anvil has a horn, flat face, but it's a multi-surface tool, so we can work on the top, we can work on the edge, we can work on the sides. There's all kinds of possibilities with this, and it's learning that tool. And then working with various hammers, the simple crossbeam hammer, which I use for most of my work, and then specialty hammers when I get into shaping sheet metal, and again, we come back to sculpture forms, creating flutes, creating texture. All of these things can be done with various hammers. And then an assortment of tongs, vices, the list goes on and on. So lots of interesting tools in a blacksmith shop. So do I collect tools? Yes and no. Since I run a small level school, I guess, typically with 4 students, although recently it's just been cut down to 2, I need a set of tools for each of the students. So I do tend to collect specific tools. Right now I probably have, at a guess, 70 pairs of tongs. Well, really, we only work with, 6 to maybe 10 on a regular basis. So 10 times 4, it was 40 tongs, and then the other 30 are extras, so they can be modified quickly for specific work. 4 workstations, so 4 anvils, for 2 forges, 2 people working off each forge. I do keep my eye open for things like post vices, and mostly it's to resell to the students. It's hard finding the tools in Ontario. There's a few auctions that they come up, but a lot of the tool availability is difficult in Ontario. So consequently, I tend to collect them more to pass on than to just have a collection of tools. The other factor is my workshop is not huge, so eventually I start tripping over all the stuff that I have collected, and then it's time to clean things out, give stuff away, sell it cheap, stuff like that. things have evolved over the years. When I first started, I was doing craft shows and some wholesale, a little bit of retail. And then I started teaching. And I really enjoy the teaching. It's become a major part of my livelihood. But I'm really trying to pass on these techniques. We were in an unfortunate position in North America in sort of the 50s, 60s, early 70s. Blacksmithing just about died out. And there were a few old-timers that were still practicing the trade, mostly rural and mostly agricultural work. And then there was a young group of interested people that came in sort of late 60s, early 70s, and into the 80s. And they started to revive this. They picked up some old techniques. They started just playing around with the details of it, and they got some success. And most of them were doing creative work, so artistic works. It could be simple railings, it could be screens, it could be home decor, things like that. And as they picked up these techniques again, they started to teach other people, because everyone in the blacksmithing community wants to see this kept alive. It is fundamental to our modern society. Not that it's used much anymore. It is still applicable in some industrial levels, but all those techniques and skills shouldn't be lost. So I'm one of those crowd. I came into it fairly late in the 80s and early 90s, and I'm, let's say, the second generation of blacksmiths that are trying to renew blacksmithing for many people all over the world. So consequently, I teach a series of courses, a basic introductory course, and then I teach specialty courses, so knife making, forge building, could be hammer making, pretty well anything that the students wanted to deal with. What I call organics, which are flowers, leaves, and twigs. Many applications we can do a specialty course on. And my hope is that the students will then set up a shop of their own and work out their own techniques, use some of the ones that I've found, and then pass it on to other students. And we have seen this in the past 20, 30 years, that in North America there's been a huge resurgence of interest in blacksmithing. And it's expanded, there's more conferences, there's more people teaching, tons and tons of information. When I started, there was only a handful of books in the library, and they gave you some basics. But once we went beyond those, you're kind of in the dark. You're figuring things out by yourself. And it's so much faster when you have an instructor looking over your shoulder going, no, you got to hit it harder or softer or faster, or change the angle of the hammer. All these subtle things you don't pick up in a lot of the videos that we have now. So I'm a big fan of one-on-one teaching or small group teaching, in-person teaching.
The lily requires 8 pieces of steel. There's 6 pedals. They're made out of 1/8" flat bar. There's a 3/8 round bar for the stem, and then there's a 1/4" round bar that are used for the stamens. So the lily has 6 petals in 2 layers of 3, and I'm using 1/8 by 1.5" flat bar for the petals. And the ends are cut at 45 degrees, so it's about 6 inches from point to point. And that's adequate for this flower. So in the gas forge I can work 3 petals at a time. That speeds the process up tremendously. So my first step is I'm going to knock that top corner into the bar. And as you can see, the flat bar wants to warp and twist and move all around on you. So a couple strokes to flatten it out. And you see this repeated on the 3 bars. Drive the top in, And then next what I'm doing is moving that tip down to the center of the bar, which you see right here. And if the bar is hot enough, a few taps should bring it into center. And then that allows me to switch ends. So you can see if you had a lot of flowers of this style to do, you suddenly do a lot of repetition work. And that can work out fine. You can get into sort of a production run and do a whole series of exactly the same points, switch around, do the next set, do the next set. So again, pointing. You want to have good tongs for this. I'm using a box jaw pair of tongs because I'm doing a lot of work on the edge of the pedal. And I actually chose a slightly small pair. I should have gone to the next size up. So this is the second end of this pedal being formed and worked. You should get sort of a lensoid shape. So now I'm using the cross peen, and it's a fairly heavy hammer, a fairly dull cross peen as well. And I'm working along the edges in the center of the bar, so it almost produces an oval shape. So I'm really stretching those edges out a fair ways. Again, thin metal moves fairly quickly. You can see the texture on there. And I'm not worrying about doing the end that the tongs are holding. That will be welded to the stem, so there's no reason that I have to texture it. And again, you can see some of the texture there. You do this on all 6 pedals. Try and create a fairly even pattern on all of them, and then they can be joined and welded to the stem. So I usually take about 2 heats per pedal to get enough width and enough texture developed into it. And you can see I'm rotating the pedal to follow the outline of it. Again, each flower you do, you're going to alter the texture on it to suit your particular application. If I was using the sharp cross peen, you get a deeper dent, but you get more like a line or a striation on the pedal. Again, this is up to personal interpretation. You can do it whichever way you want. It's the final look that you're after. I find the blunt cross peen works very well for this. So although you haven't seen it in the video, I've done 6 of these now. This is the third one that you've seen, and that's our finished look. So that end hasn't been done, is not textured, and what I'm doing now is I'm going to bend 3 of them at 90 degrees and 3 of them at 45 degrees. So there's 45, just over the horn. And this makes it easier to position when I weld it. That's the only reason I'm doing this now. And that one, 90 degrees. The 90 degree ones go on the bottom when you weld it. So you end up welding the 45s first. So the stamens are the 1/4 inch round rod, and that's using the shouldering tool to create a shoulder back about 1/4 of an inch from the bar, and then that little tiny knob on the end, I'll work with the hammer a little bit to create roughly a round shape. And again, you can be as fussy as you want with this. So the shouldering tool is mild steel, made out of some heavy angle iron, some 3/8 flat bar, a couple guides. So this is just tapping it into a really rough, stylized ball shape. And I'll be making 3 of these, and they'll all be slightly different lengths. And drawing out the stem portion of the stamen. And this is just really breaking the mechanical look of the bar, giving it some organic texture. That's what we're looking for, a bit of a taper into the round bit. The stem, this is rough and ready. I'm just hammering that mechanical line, that machine surface, and creating some texture on the outside of the bar, breaking the straight line, some bends in the bar. Really just not a complicated procedure. There you can see, it's just texturing it. So these are the 3 stamens, slightly different length, all made out of 1/4 round bar. And then here they're welded in slightly different positions on the stem. The first layer of the petals welded onto the stem, the second layer of petals welded onto the stem. And now it's the torch work. So it's a little bit important here, your order of operation. You want to actually bend your bottom petals first, and then when you switch to the next layer, you're bending the top petals to rest down on the bottom petals, so there's a fairly tight fit. Now, in the original sample, I've bent the petals way back and I've done a heavy reflex curve on them. I decided not to do on this flower. I changed the position of it a little bit. It's a more open lily, something that's a little bit more recognizable in summer as opposed to later in the season. And the camera throws the look of the torch off a little bit. It's actually, I'm just up at basically a medium orange for bending it, so it's not super hot. Undo the tips, and again just using the scrolling pliers and just pull the tip back a little bit. Give it some flow, some reflex to it. At the end, I will go in and I just warm up the stamens a little bit and separate them maybe 1/4 of an inch in the middle, something like that. Just enough optically that it looks like a plant growing. And a lot of times with these flowers, you'll work away on them and then there's a point you just want to step back and take a look at it and say, oh, maybe I really like that, and it might not be your original pattern. So in this case, it was the leaving the petals further open. I really enjoy the forge work on flowers, but the torch work is interesting. It's almost a meditative state as it warms up and you're transferring things very small increments, just seeing how it's moving. And then I'm just warming this a little bit close up to the connection point and tipping those petals back just a touch.
Do I write my own textbooks? Sort of, yes. I have a number of publications. They are smallish, and they're very, very targeted. There's plans for making air hammers and plans for making forges. There's information on basic blacksmithing. It's enough that a person can get a start, and often answers those little questions of, what am I doing wrong? Like, this doesn't seem to be working. It's not quite like the videos. So I go into a fair bit of detail in some of these publications. They are specifically geared to a project as opposed to an overall broad textbook, which some of the other Smiths have done, and I do highly recommend them because for minimum dollars, you do get a lot in a single package. So it is worth looking around for various textbooks on blacksmithing. Very uncommon for a blacksmith to be a goldsmith as well. I dabble in the precious metals. So silver, gold, copper is not quite a precious metal, but behaves sort of similarly. I've done enough that I enjoy it. The techniques are almost identical, but it's a whole different set of tools you need. And anytime you're working with gold or silver, you want polished tools, because any tiny score mark or scratch on your hammer will be transferred to the soft metal of the gold or silver. And so I have a very small collection, if you will, of jewelry working tools that I work with. Polished hammers, pliers instead of tongs that are all smoothed off so that they're not scratching the surfaces or anything like that. It's rare that I have people commissioning a ring or something along those lines out of precious metals. But it does happen, so I have those tools. The skills today would be rusty, but I would just practice up, and again, it's not something you lose, it's just something you need to practice a bit with. So I came into blacksmithing fairly young, and my focus was on knife making. And I realized that making knives, the forging was simple and straightforward, but then it required a lot of grinding. And grinding is kind of dirty and somewhat boring and takes a lot of time. And eventually I found, well, I'm less interested in doing all this grinding to make a really nice knife. What else can I do? And I hit onto flowers, primarily flowers and leaves and twigs and things like that, organic shapes. And I started making a few of those. And the nice thing is I can develop whatever shape I want, and nobody really can say, you're wrong, that's not a flower. It's my interpretation of a flower. So then I started looking at piecing things together and creating some sculptural forms and creating just different things with flowers. And mostly they're representational. So you could look at that flower and say, oh yeah, that's a daisy, or that's a calla lily, or that's a rose, or something along those lines. So there's a fairly almost one-to-one relationship between what's my metalwork and what's out there. And then recently I've gotten into more derivative flowers, things I call Dr. Zeus flowers, so things that are out of normal, very different, and I'm starting to experiment with some sculptural forms in that lines. I've done some medium-sized sculptures, sort of the 6-7 feet size, and you're starting to work with lots of material, you get lots of depth, you can do some creative development with that. And it really is open up to your imagination. You play with some sketches, play with some ideas, mess around with some components. It really is a series of experimentations. And then I find an experiment that works and that I like, and I start collecting that together into a sculptural piece. And it may be just a very simple, small unit, and then I build on that and build on that. It could be a twig. There's a sculpture of a tree, and each twig came, the original design came from a conference I attended, and then I started modifying it, and then shortly you have a whole tree develop. And this sort of steps over into some other areas where I get into some sign brackets and things like that. You can get some very nice organic line structures in the rough triangular form of a sign bracket. And then the trick is convincing your customer that that's really what they want. Many people in Ontario anyways are very conservative with their ironwork. And it's part of my job to present what can be done in ornamentation. And then the other part of my job is to do something that I enjoy doing, which is the ornaments, the different artwork, as opposed to just purely architectural, functional. Again, think of a sign bracket, something like that. I collaborate with designers and architects. Very rarely. I've had a couple bad experiences with designers. It's not their fault. It's a lack of education on their end. When I'm working with somebody who designs, we have to speak the same language. And I'm happy to produce what they design, maybe minor adjustments and things like that. But so often I get a very, what I call wishy-washy idea. It's not even clear enough that I can start generating sketches from it to make something. So I've really backed off trying to deal with designers. Architects, that's a whole different scale from what I typically work with. So I'm not doing large architectural pieces, so I tend to smaller home pieces. And this is an interesting shift, because the homeowner, when I go in, I can talk to them and sit down and show them some pictures, and they can say, oh, I like this, or I like that, or whatever, and we can work with that. They may not be designers, but they're certainly, they have their preferences of what they like, and I try and tailor my designs to what their preferences are. So in general, I don't work with designers and I don't work with architects. It's, again, a personal choice from early on previous experience. I just did not want to go that path. So the most common collaborations that I'm involved with blacksmithing is teaching and then working on larger projects with other smiths. So there's a couple smiths that I will rent out my services to. We have a good working relationship. I would hire them on projects as well. And essentially you set up a rapport with them, and you want to do stuff that's in a similar style. So we're looking at the same sketches, maybe helping out on a large railing. It could be simple as labor to help install, or it could be forging individual components or welding or what have you. The other area that I collaborate a lot with is the education. So in Ontario, we have an artist blacksmith group called the Ontario Artist Blacksmiths Association. And one of our mandates is to teach. So with that, we do a conference in Canada every 2 years, and it spreads around province to province to province. So in 2 years, it'll probably be Ontario's term turn to actually produce that conference again. And I will more than likely be on that committee to produce the conference, and probably, will be part of the education end of it. So that's collaborating with other Smiths, because we have to try and get our education goals in line. You're teaching this, I'm teaching that. Do they connect? Are they related? Do they need some background information to actually complete whatever we're trying to get across? So those for me are the most common. Direct peer-to-peer collaboration with other Smiths on work, and then collaboration with, again, education, other Smiths with education. I am not aware of a lot of subsidies or grants specifically targeted for blacksmithing. The Ontario Artist Blacksmiths Association has a small grant awarded, I think it's yearly, to an up-and-coming smith. And it allows them usually to take a course, possibly in the States, possibly in Canada, something like that, to further their skills. And part of that grant is that student has to come back to OABA, the Ontario Artists Blacksmiths Association, and present what they learned, so share the details of what they've learned. There are a number of arts grants, and they're general, broad grants, and the question is just creating the proposal and tapping into them. I haven't taken advantage of any of the grants. Some of my friends have, and have been awarded significant grants to usually do a specific study case that they wouldn't normally be able to achieve. So there are some access, but as far as I know, not specifically related to blacksmithing or even metalworking. It's more a broad category where people create a proposal, and then it's evaluated against all the other proposals. Years ago, I looked at some different scales of work. And as a young blacksmith, I was entranced with larger scale work, massive sculptures, things that would require cranes to move around. And I started working with the materials, and I realized if I ever produced something on that scale, I would need a huge workshop, huge tools, massive outlay of money. I wasn't in a position where I could afford something like that, so I scaled my expectations back a bit. And I started with small stuff, very almost jewelry size, something you could hold in your hand. And got my techniques under my belt, learned some skills, all of those things. And then I started stretching up, so I would be in the smaller intermediate size, what I consider intermediate size. So something 3 or 4 feet in size, a small garden gate, maybe a table, sort of a breakfast table, something like that. And then as my skills and confidence increased, I started working on what I call an intermediate scale sculptures. And that's about 6 to 8 or 10 feet in size. Now, my actual workshop is quite small, so I really have to plan out how I tackle intermediate scale sculptures, because I can literally fill up the workshop working on a component of a sculpture that size. So that's limited my production a fair bit to things that are, think of human size, and that's what I consider intermediate size. The large sculptures are still interesting, but at this stage in my career, no, I won't be tackling them. I just don't have the facilities and just don't have the need to create something that's 20 feet tall or anything like that. public art comes up in the blacksmithing world occasionally, at least. I've done a little bit of public art. It's interesting. Usually there's a reasonable funding with it. A lot of times municipalities and that have a little more dollars than the average person does that they can put towards art. It's not a huge requirement in Ontario. In other countries, a certain percentage of a building budget has to be devoted to art. And in Ontario, that's a pretty small amount. It's really an afterthought. So consequently, it's sort of left up to art societies and things like that to research grants and then apply to have, it could be a welded sculpture, it could be a stone sculpture, concrete sculpture, anything like that. And then it would be up to myself as a blacksmith to create the proposal for a blacksmith sculpture. One of the relatively more recent public art pieces that I did, there's a town, it's called Southampton, and there's an art school there. And they wanted an archway running over a walkway that ran between the two buildings of the school. And on the top of the archway it says Gateway to the Arts. So I did up a proposal of a series of panels, and these are all wildflowers from Ontario, naturally grown here, native species to Ontario. And there's 20 panels. They're, trying to think here, they were about 10 by 20, let's say, roughly. And they occupy two faces of each post. And then the other two faces of the pillars or the post, the art school could put in artworks from local artists. So this was the best of both worlds, I thought. They had a way of showcasing local talent, and then I get a permanent installation structure with some very, very interesting designs and flowers, organic motifs, which I love doing. That was challenging because each one of the columns was 10 feet long, and then the archway over the top was 12 feet. And that's the maximum that fits in my shop. So I had a lot of scratching my head, figuring out how I was going to move things around and work on them and still be able to access my tools, my primary tools. But it worked out. So how do people appreciate blacksmithing compared to the other arts? Difficult question. Most people, there's an interest and an attraction to blacksmithing. They like the look of it, they like the details and things like that. But a lot of the populace has no understanding that it may take hours to create one of those elements, one of those flowers, one of those spirals, whatever component is. And then that has to be all assembled together. So the understanding of time and materials for blacksmithing is not always in sync with what the reality is with blacksmithing. Oh, you can do that in 15 minutes. Well, no, it's actually 5 hours it took to do that. So there's not a huge appreciation for the amount of time and the complexity of what we do as blacksmiths, at least in North America. Now, you take somebody who is a flat artist, a painter, something like that. There's often a higher appreciation there, and it may take them just as long to do a painting as it takes for me to do a small sculpture. But people recognize that technique. They've had some experience with it. Often many people did some simple painting in school as they're going through, and they realize what's involved with that. But it's more remote when you get into blacksmithing. I was paid a very high compliment years ago. There was a couple that came into my booth at a craft show, and they looked over all the things I did, and the woman mentioned to the man, well, you can do this stuff. And he looked it over and he shook his head and he said, I can't do this. And I talked to them, and very nice couple, and it turns out he was a welder, and he knew what I was doing. He'd seen some blacksmithing, but the techniques I was using was not the same as what welding. Sure, things are welded together, but it's much more involved when you're sculpting a piece out of a piece of flat bar or sheet metal, something like that. So for me, that was a very high compliment that he recognized the work and that he wasn't able to produce the same thing, although he had his own skill sets as a welder. So there's a lot of challenges in the blacksmithing as a career or even as a hobby. One of the main challenges is physical. As I get older, my back complains more. I can't move heavier things, although I do have mechanical advantage in the shop. I have hoists and lifts and things like that. So you really start looking at protecting yourself. My back, my elbow, shoulders, all of this after 30 years of use and abuse starts to become a problem. So consequently, at this stage, I'm looking for smaller projects that are detailed as opposed to more of the grunt work, bigger, heavier things. That's another reason why I'm not considering large sculpture. Another challenge, finding equipment, that's a big challenge. We can make an awful lot, but you need some primary tools, forge, anvil, hammer, vise, maybe a welder, to make a lot of your tools. Without those, you're kind of stuck. So fortunately, because there's been a major resurgence of interest, most of the primary tools we can buy, and then some we can modify and make. Next challenges would be education. I still try and go to as many conferences as I can. I think everybody has valid information that I can work with, that I can learn from. And it might be just a slightly different way of doing a very simple thing. And it's like, oh, well, I've never tried that. So it's accessing the education. And there's lots on YouTube, both good and bad, as we know. So currently there's lots of videos being made. And at this stage of the game, I can sort through what doesn't make sense to me, what won't work in my shop. And then I can view something and say, oh, well, that's worth a try. Maybe I'll see how that works. So education. And then it's not public acceptance, but it's public awareness. Some TV shows right now have sort of skewed the awareness of blacksmithing. The fortunate thing is more and more people are getting into it every day, so they act as ambassadors to the rest of the population, saying, oh, no, when you make it this way, it takes this long, and this is what you're looking at. So it's really public awareness is probably one of the biggest challenges in this field. And why is something, pick a number, $100 or $5,000? It's just really the extra time that goes in it, and material costs are somewhat there. So it's making them aware of the permanence of this art form and the applicability of this art form. Because there's lots of places in a home or outside that you could do sculptural ironwork. Doing this for 30 years, I've been fairly cautious in the shop. I work by myself. There's lots and lots of risks with this type of work. When you have your own home shop, you're less likely to have inspectors come through and say, oh, you haven't got this shield on this piece of equipment, you haven't got this fume extraction. So it's all up to you to be your own health and safety inspector. When we're grinding, there's tons of particulate that come off the, usually knives or whatever steel. If we're not using a mask or a respirator, we're inhaling that. So anytime we're doing extensive grinding, it's better to wear a filter mask. The forges, they put out a great deal of infrared, a small amount of ultraviolet, but that attacks the eyes. So again, if you're doing high temperature work, forge welding, things like that, I like to use a welder's lens, a shade 3 welder's lens for that. Any darker and I can't see the anvil and I start tripping over things in the shop, and that's its own hazard. The fumes, like the forges put out a significant amount of carbon monoxide, which is poisonous. They put out a lot of carbon dioxide, which you can smother in. So ventilation is incredibly important. Cuts and abrasions, sharp bits of metal, getting burned. All of these are everyday occurrences in the blacksmith shop. And you learn how to mitigate them a little bit, but you have to be aware of them. They really can impact your life significantly. Hearing is another one. And I actually have significant hearing loss after doing this 30 years. And I've worn hearing protection virtually every day, either ear muffs or ear plugs. In the summertime, I find the ear muffs are pretty hot. It gets quite hot in my workshop. So I switch over to earplugs. It helps. But I was in very recently for a hearing test, and he said, yeah, that looks like you work with heavy equipment, and there's a serious notch out of my hearing range. So I have to be extra careful with that. There's many considerations, health hazards. Some of the paint structures that we use, most of it is relatively mild, but I use occasionally high-grade automotive paint with epoxy primers, and all of that stuff is really nasty toxic. So again, a respirator for that. Some of the alloys, if I'm working with a brass instead of a bronze, that can gas off zinc, galvanizing poisoning. Many respiratory hazards when you think about it. So when I first start a project, there's a dialogue with the customer, trying to figure out what type of thing they want, and maybe an envelope of ideas of where they want to go with this object. And I'll sit down with them, show them some photos, kind of make notes of things that they like, they don't like. Is there a statement they're trying to say? Things like that. Then I'll start sketching out, and the first sketches are really rough. And they're what I call thumbnail sketches, so they might be 2 inches by 3 inches or something like that. And for me, it's just getting an idea of, well, does this stick together? Can I put this blob and this point together, and does it kind of look all right? Once I like that, I might do a dozen different little component sketches. And it's like, well, okay, where am I going with this? And then usually when I sit down the next time with the customer, I will have done sort of a full-scale sketch, probably by hand. I'll talk about the computer in a little bit. Full-scale sketch of what I would like to do, and it's sort of 3 different options. We could do option A, option B, option C. Then, if the client picks one, I may go into further detail, or if they say, oh, what about this component? Could I see a detail of that? And then sketch that up. Unfortunately, in today's society, we're so computer-oriented that the hand-drawn sketch has been demoted, and everybody wants to see a computer rendition of what you're going to make. It will take me longer to make something on the computer, like a sketch, that's reasonably accurate to what I'll make, than for me to go out to the shop and make what we call a maquette, a small component, maybe a piece of the project, that a person can hold in their hand and take a look at and say, oh, I see the texture, I see the weight, I see the joins, I see all of this stuff. The computer, for me, for sketching, is somewhat unwieldy. Pencil and paper, straightforward, you can erase it, you can do all kinds of stuff. The computer is just, it's not a tool that I have mastered for sketching out ironwork. Some smiths have, and I envy them, because now they can take that component that they did on a project 20 years ago and pull it into this other project, and their sketching's done. You can cut and paste very easily. Whereas with me, I have to redraw it and resketch it, and it's pretty well every time for a client. So it's, I don't use the computer that much. Communication, absolutely. As I'll scan it, send emails back and forth, tweak things, but it's usually a hand-drawn sketch that my customers get. Right now, I'm working on actually transporting some sculptures to a gallery. A new gallery opened up literally just down the road from me in Cargill proper. I'm just outside of the town of Cargill. And I went over and met them for the first time, probably about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And they bought a series of buildings in the downtown, older buildings. They're redoing the insides, polishing everything up. I think it's going to be gorgeous. I haven't seen it most recently. And for July 1st, which is coming up in a few days, they are opening their gallery up for a couple of months with a whole series of artworks. So I'm one of the contributing artists. And I'm taking in 3 different sculptures. One's a tree structure. One is a serpentine table sculpture. And then another one is what I call a warrior sculpture. And he's actually semi-life-size, a little bit shorter than me, skeletal, sort of baboon creature with a spear in his hand and a shield. And he's an interesting one. He's really hard to transport because of all the points and the spikes and stuff. But it should be an interesting showing. I'm quite thankful it's close to home, so it'll be easy setup. And if I forget a nut or a bolt or something like that, I can just pop home and get that. So that's currently what I'll be working on this afternoon. We'll be loading up and transporting over from there. Other than that, working the shop, what's coming up? There's courses. Ontario has been able to reopen a little bit, and so I'm back teaching courses. That's been filling my schedule fairly dramatically. And then I have, I think I've got a couple of gas forges to make, and I've got, I think what else is on the list? There's some proposals for some other galleries that I'll have to do. So again, sketching, it's nothing that I've completed, it's more the sketch work for the foundation work for some proposals, and see if they are interested in any of those. So that's my next couple months of work laid out for me there. I'm one of the blacksmiths that sees a very bright future for blacksmithing. A few years back, I taught up at a college. It's called Fleming College of the Arts up in Haliburton. And the students there, it ranged in age from about 18 up to, what was the oldest, maybe 60, something like that. They all had a passion for blacksmithing. And this is what I want to see in people that are starting to take on the blacksmithing role, whether it's a hobby or whether it's actually a career. Over the past, again, 20 years, there's been significant work in North America to make blacksmithing a recognized art form. And the smiths all over are doing absolutely astonishing, amazing, jaw-dropping work. And all this does is it builds the presence of blacksmithing. And people will become more used to it. It becomes more accepted. People say, oh, well, maybe I will put a sculpture on my lawn. Or, oh, maybe, we'll look at a privacy railing or something, a gate or a grill. There could be many, many options with this. And I do see more and more acceptance, understanding of it, slowly. It's a very slow process. But at least when I talk to most people and I say, I'm an artist blacksmith, they go, oh, yeah, okay. Do you do gates or railings or something like that? They recognize that I don't make horseshoes, that I make other things that can be utilitarian, but at the same time, I really am trying to create an aesthetic value, something like that. So I do think the future of blacksmithing is bright. tons more information available from when I started, so that's a huge plus. A lot of it is digital, so it won't go away. You'll be able to access this for centuries, and it's a relatively, it's a relatively easy thing to start. It's a very hard thing to master. But a person with a weekend course can pick up enough skills that they could go home and set up a small workshop. And the actual basic investment is lower than what people think, definitely lower than a woodworking shop. So you need a forge, pick a round number, $1,000. You need an anvil, pick another round number, $800 to $1,000. And then you need some hand tools, hammer, some tongs. A vise is nice, not critical in the beginning. Say another $200, $300, $400 to mess around, just to play with this. That's not a huge expenditure. Whereas you look at woodworking, and yes, you need a table saw, and that might be $5,000. You need a jointer, well, that might be $1,200. You need a bandsaw, that might be, pick a number, $800, $1,000. And a planer, and a sander, and a shaper, and it goes on and on and on. You can very easily have $20,000 or $30,000 of woodworking tools just to comfortably start woodworking. Whereas blacksmithing, a few thousand. Most people can get up and running. Obviously it doesn't include a building. Hopefully they have an outbuilding of some sort. And then they can play with it and see if it's something that really strikes a core in them, or whether it's something that, no, I really am not that interested. It's hot, it's dirty, it's a lot of work. I want to do something easier. So I do think the future's bright. I do think with investment and that, people can actually enjoy this at least as a hobby level, and a few as a professional level. When I can, I will combine with other mediums. Metal and wood go together beautifully. Metal and stone also go together very nicely. Upon occasion, metal and ceramics, metal and glass. All of these things, different metals, bronze and copper and steel, all combine very nicely. Now, I would not call myself a real woodworker. I can kind of hack something out with the wood. Usually in that case, I will hire somebody who's a cabinet maker and do a tabletop, and then I would do the iron base or something along that lines. Stonework, again, I'm looking for simple stone shapes that I can then incorporate into something else. Again, it could be a small table, it could be a sculptural form, something like that. I'm really not proficient in many of the arts areas like ceramics or something like that. Again, I find somebody who is, and I kind of give them the details of what I'm after. Say it's a bowl, or say it's a vessel of some sort that I want to make a cradle for, and then I'll work with what they give me. So there's definitely collaboration there, but it's more, I more use the other pieces as accent pieces, as opposed to the metalwork is well, I'm a blacksmith, so the metalwork ends up being the primary component. Since I started, I've investigated a number of different crafts because I'm interested in all of them. And sometimes you talk to people and they're not willing to share information or techniques or things like that. And then when I got into blacksmithing, it was just the opposite. It was, here, let me show you how to do this. This is how I do. And it's a very, very open community. There's sharing of techniques and ideas and tools and philosophies and all these different things. So when I started out, I looked at that and I liked that. I liked that people were helping me get started, getting a step up, carry on. So I've kind of adopted that as a philosophy that I'm going to try and help new smiths get a foothold in this. Well, what do they really need? What information? Where can they find the information? And basically to create an environment, a learning environment, where people can develop their own skills and add to this art and craft. And when we start, it's very, very basic. Like, the skills are new. Everything's crude and rough. But if with some encouragement, people can start refining that. They can start developing their skills. They can have hands-on. And I'm a firm believer in passing on and paying it forward. Not paying back, but paying it forward. So lots of people helped me tremendously, whether they loaned me tools or showed me how to do techniques and things like that. How can I pay that forward to the next generation and say, okay, I got help, here's some help. Maybe you use it, maybe you don't. I can't determine what the person does with the information I give. But really trying to sort of get the next generation enthused about blacksmithing, both as consumers, people that want to have it in their home or on their property, and people that want to do it. People that enjoy working with their hands, enjoy working with metal, because metal is its own creature, its own medium to work with. Different from wood, different from ceramics. Very, very enjoyable and very rewarding with me. So, in a nutshell, it would be paying it forward is my philosophy. Behind me there's a portrait, and did I actually do that? No, I didn't. I was at a craft show and I was able to trade for that portrait. So the girl that did it, she liked my ironwork, and this was many, many years ago, actually, when I first started. And I liked her artwork and was, okay, can we trade? Absolutely. So that worked out, in my case, I think, very well. But I think she was happy with her trade as well. So unfortunately, no, I didn't do that portrait. I encourage people to take a look around them and see where artwork will enhance their lives. It doesn't have to be blacksmithing. It could be a mural on a wall. It could be a welded sculpture piece. It could be stone sculpture. It could be wood. I mean, there's so much that the humans can express through their hands. Whether it's painting, whether it's sketching, whether it's sculpture, whatever. We so often are caught in a work environment where it's routine and it's industrial and it's all of that. Artwork brings joy to people's lives. So if you can incorporate it in your life, find a way of doing it. It's an absolutely great contribution if you make it, or gift if you're receiving it into your life. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm glad we could coordinate things to make it work out. I enjoyed working with you.